I don't think I've been to Portugal for probably 30 years, if that.
Wow.
Maybe longer.
What did you enjoy in Portugal?
What did I enjoy? Oh, I don't know. I came for holiday, for summer, you know. God, what is the most popular place in Portugal for summer vacation?
For the tourists, maybe Lisbon or Algarve because of the beaches.
Yeah, Algarve, that's where I was, yeah. We always used to go on to Spain for holidays and working a lot, you know, in years, I mean, in the 60s. No, I loved it. It was lovely, you know, and then we started going to Portugal when I was living in London still, you know.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. And it's funny you mentioned Algarve because there's been always a lot of not Hungarian but British people there. But you have to come here again when all this COVID-19 is dead. You have to come here again.
I would love to. Maybe come to some film festival or something.
Yeah, why not? Maybe I will the person that can manage that. But let's talk about you and your movies. And thank you so much for having me here in such an hour for you. No, because it's so early there. It's 9 o'clock there.
Well, I'm always up since 6, 5. You know, ever since I was an assistant director, you know, you get into that habit, and then you're always up. You know,
and it's good to have that habit so early in your life, because it's very good to have a good sleep. But if you sleep too many hours, you're missing a lot of the day, right?
I know. Tell me, so how much of a film business there is in Portugal now?
That's a great question, because we don't have much business here. We have small producing companies that are depending on state subsidies. We don't have an industry, so it's not quite the most pleasant place to make movies. But do you know some Portuguese filmmakers or some Portuguese movies?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, no.
Okay, I will send some recommendations to you after this conversation. But tell me, what were the movies that inspired you in your early career?
Oh my God! Well, Laurence Olivier's Hamlet.
Okay.
Was 1948. Which I saw in Hungary when I was 8 years old. And I still remember sitting in the seat of the cinema in Budapest. And the cinema is still there. I noticed it years ago. And I've never forgotten it. It made a tremendous impression. I mean, for this little kid about Hamlet and all that. And I mean, I wasn't speaking English then, but it was an incredible film. And then there was a Hungarian movie, very famous Hungarian film, which was made after the war, called, in English, it was called Somewhere in Europe. And it was a fantastic film about some lost children wandering around the countryside after or at the end of the Second World War. And they take up hiding in a kind of a castle or a small little palace, you know. And the old man who lives in there was an actor or something, you know. And it's an incredible movie. So Hamlet, Somewhere in Europe, and a French movie with Gérard Philippe called Femme Fan la Tulipe. And it was Gérard Philippe and Gina Lollobrigida. Mm-hmm. And again, it was after the war. Again, it was in Hungary, and those films were shown in Hungary. And then English-speaking movies were forbidden, or English movies, because of communism. And so then there was nothing else except Russian propaganda movies. And some of them were quite incredible, you know. And it was always about Russian history, Peter the Great, and was a wonderful film called The Battle of Stalingrad, which was end of the Second World War, which actually was directed by this amazing Russian actor-director at that time during communism called Andrei Bondarchuk. He also made a film, but by then I was in England, and by then I was a director many years later, which I saw, called War and Peace.
Yeah.
It was this incredible Russian movie. It was 8 hours long.
Yeah, it's that's the most famous. I think it's Sergei Boncharuk, not Andrei. I'm not certain, but I think it's Sergei.
Yeah, Sergei Bondarchuk, incredible director and incredible actor, because he played the main part in War and Peace, you know. Yeah. And so, I mean, those movies before I really started in films, you know, but those early three ones, they were very vitally important in my beginning of my obsession about movies. And you know, it continues. I mean, it's that's all I did in my life, and that's all I can do is direct films, you know. And the business is so weird and so strange that sometimes you deny that pleasure of actually making movies, because it's very difficult to set up films, you know, unless you're doing a highly commercial movie, which is, I wouldn't say it's garbage, it's very entertaining, you know, but I always wanted to make movies about something, and not to have a heavy message in it, but about life, you know. It's always been important, and I managed somehow out of the 25 or whatever movies I made over the years that some of them were like that, and some of them they weren't. Some of them they were kind of jobs, you know, which you undertook, you know, because I love filming, and if I'm not doing something which just gives me 100% pleasure and joy, it's important to keep on working.
Yeah, and the kind of movies that you like to make, I think that nowadays with all the crisis that's going on in the movie industry, with all the majors fighting each other for dominating everything, that kind of movies, that kind of like special movies that you made, like The Ruling Class or A Day in the Death of Joe Egg or many others, are quite impossible nowadays, don't you think?
Yeah, it is impossible, but you can't give up trying, because sometimes by fluke, you know, something happens, and you can sneak by while nobody is looking, you know. Not often enough, you know, but, you know, as long as I can do something really which is fulfilling for me every 10 years of my life, it's worth the struggle of fighting for it, you know. And, you know, but between this and that, you know, I tried in the past to do television, you know, which now becoming more important than films. But it's a very, the business itself has always been a very difficult thing, because they always want something which was yesterday's, I mean, that's the greatest success of yesterday. And you only valid, you know, because of whatever the last thing you have done. And they never look at a director's work overall of his whole career, you know. I mean, it was and it probably is much easier in Europe still. Not so much in England, because England absolutely copies the American film business, which they shouldn't do, because they lose their identity in a way, But I mean, there are so many wonderful English actors and will be forever, that is the key to English movies, of course, But I love England, and I grew up in England, having escaped from Hungary in 1956, and England really become my home, my real adopted country, and then I left it, around 1980, when I came to America, when I was doing the Changeling, and I never lived permanently in England, and but it's I had a fantastic, incredible kind of time, childhood, and everything well, not childhood, because I was 19 when I got to London and started in the film business. But it was an incredible time, and I'm very grateful to have got there at that time, and really to see the last good days of England and also British films. And then I got to Los Angeles the first time in '63, when I went under contract to Universal Studios for 7 years. And then I saw the last good days of American movies, while still the star system was nearly finished, but still at Universal, everybody from Cary Grant to Gregory Peck and Lee Marvin and Alfred Hitchcock and that world. So I was caught the tail end of all that, and so it's been an incredible education for me. Truly, because every road, I always used to say, leads to Hollywood in a way, because when you achieve some kind of a recognition or success in England or Spain or Portugal or whatever, you suddenly swallowed up by Hollywood,
Yeah.
because they want everything and everybody, and it's also, I mean, despite of the problems we're going through, an amazing country, America, but my real home is England, and not Hungary, because what I lived through in Hungary during the Second World War, and fascism and Nazism and then communism and all that, it unfortunately lost my deep love for that country, and it still is incredible to go back. When I go back, which is not often enough, but every 2 years I'm back for some reason. And the minute you get off the plane and the air and the smell of that air hits your face, from your early childhood, you remember you're finally back home again,
Yeah.
But I'm a complete gypsy, like we all are, and but I really, belong to Hungary, England, and America.
Yeah.
And the
sorry.
film camera running at 30, but 24 frames per second, which it doesn't run anymore, but whatever it remains to be, because it was pure magic. The cameras, we work with, the Mitchell cameras or the Panavision cameras, and the film, and the smell of the film when the assistants were changing the magazines, or the smell of the film in the editing room, the 35 millimeter film. It's impossible to explain to the new generation today, because sadly they just don't know it. All they know is the computers,
Yes, but I think that at the same time, when you watch like one of your movies made in 35 millimeter or in film, and then you watch like a digital movie from nowadays. Of course, there is something different in the texture, in the visuals, and film is much more rich. It's richer than digital in that aspect, don't you think?
There's no question about it. But the problem is that one gets so used to it, so quickly, because if you see a movie on digital, I mean, within 15 seconds, you forget that you are looking at it, and it's not as beautiful as it, because it really depends on the story of what the film is about, and I mean, it has incredible advantage of it shooting on with electronic cameras, because you can get into places which you couldn't get in with a movie camera, which was huge, and heavy, and so it has this immediateness, but I mean, it's the same with photography. I mean, you take a picture with your iPhone, which is wonderful quality, but you never make a print of it. So when you 50 years later, you can't look through 85 million files for iPhone, so it kind of disappears into infinity. And those days when you took pictures, and I mean, I've got my Leica camera here standing, which is digital, but I mean, no, it's not. Is it digital? Yes, it is digital. One which is digital and one which is not. And then, of course, I have all the Nikon cameras and the Hasselblads, which it's in my closet, but I haven't used them in years, But there's no comparison. There's absolutely no comparison. The quality of photography and what you can do with darkness and light, and when you shoot, and the real art of cinematography was while we were shooting on film, because in digital, everything corrects itself very easily electronically, and there's a certain artificiality about it, which is not what we used to know. I mean, if you look at an old Bergman movie in black and white, or on, there's no comparison,
Yeah, that's really true. And I was thinking that you mentioned a topic that I think it's crucial nowadays, and it will be one of the discussions of the future, that is the preservation, because it's like what you said, when you take a picture on film, on photographic film, you can preserve it and you know that you have it. But in an iPhone, in 50 years, you don't have that iPhone anymore, and that file is lost somewhere in space. And it will be one of the problems of the future, because now more than ever we are shooting images and films in a great speed because of the easiness of the technology. But many of those films and pictures are going to disappear because they can't be preserved in a proper way.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I have most of my films on 35mm prints, sitting in a storage,
Yeah.
But they fade away, and when you have done over 20 films in your life, you can't constantly kind of preserve it and reproduce it, because the cost of it is really phenomenal, for a director like me, I mean, if you Steven Spielberg, Stevie can, to kind of do it, but it's very sad, I remember years ago when I was an assistant director in London, in England, at Shepperton Studios. It was raining very much, when I came back from lunch, and I rushed into one of those listen huts. Listen huts are what they used in the Second World War for the army, and it was in the outskirts of the studio, and that's where they were keeping all the films not to store them forever, but for the time being while you're working on editing it in the studio. And I rushed into it, and I remember there was all these cans, because if you were paying rent, then you could have a kind of a vault in there where it's locked up. But when you have died and they had to empty the vault, it was dumped in the corridor. And so it was pouring with rain into this building. And there was all these film cans piled up to the sky. And it was the film, I don't know if it was the negative or the positive, of a very famous football game when Hungary beat England for the first time in 1963, you know. And that was incredible, because it destroyed English football at the time. And it made the Hungarian team, Kocsis and Puskás and those people, the absolute kings of the world. And there were these 10 film cans of that game absolutely rotting away, you know. And it's a cemetery of films, you know, those kind of places, you know. Yeah. Archives, you know, film archives. My films are in a place called Pacific Archive, and it is huge. And they're all great movies and stuff. Everybody, other directors, producers, they put their stuff in there and pay for it, you know. But it is like walking into Forest Lawn, you know, this big cemetery here, where everybody is buried, or the Hollywood cemetery from Marilyn Monroe on and up and down, and all. You know, it's a very sad thing, because it's all dead. But I know, so I don't know what one does about preserving films, but the great thing is that on the internet, you can basically access anything. I mean, anything you're looking for, you just put your name in and 2 seconds later, the film comes out, and even without paying for it, you can play it, you know. And so that's a tremendous plus. But that's the joy of internet and the research and all that stuff. So it's great and terrible at the same time.
Yeah, and despite that, even that the archives are like a cemetery, like you said, there's the chance, even if it's expensive, but there is the negative for one day if someone wants to restore. And I was thinking, when are we going to see a proper release of The Odd Job on any format? Because I have such a curiosity about that film, and I can't find it anywhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And it's not on the internet, huh?
It's on YouTube on a very, very poor VHS copy. But I think it needs like a proper release now.
Yeah, amazing, yeah. Yeah. Well, when I did Odd Job, you know, that was because of the Peter Sellers movie. Yeah. My career was completely dead at the time. And I worked on 5 movies, and I walked out of them all. And then the first movie I did after Ghost in the Noonday Sun was the Odd Job film, which I think may have been like, I don't know, when was it? I think it was 1987. Was it 87? I don't know what year it was. And the Peter Sellers movie was 1980.
1970, not 1973, or
excuse me, 1973.
Yeah.
And so, 1970. So it was 1978, I think, when I did Odd Job. And so it was 5 years. For 5 years, I didn't make another movie, because I was basically punishing myself unconsciously for not making the greatest success of a film with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, you know. And it's not an excuse, but it wasn't my fault, but it was the circumstances of the movie. And and Peter's kind of terrible, insane kind of destructive behavior on that film, and not just on that film, but in most of the movies he's ever made.
Yeah.
His latter movies, I mean, including the Pink Panther movies, because poor Blake Edwards had just as many problems with him as I did, you know. And but we all loved him, and he was a genius, you know. And it was still worthwhile suffering through everything just to kind of touch that wonderful lunatic.
But I mean, you and the documentary explains all the story really well, and it's quite touching. But I mean, you went from there to a movie where Keith Moon was supposed to play the lead. Keith Moon, the mad drummer from the Who. I mean, didn't you thought that could not be also a good idea?
Well, that's why Keith Moon was a great friend of Graham Chapman, who was starring in the film. Yeah. And originally, I think they wanted Peter Sellers, but then Peter was dead by then. And so Graham, who was one of the Monty Pythons, you know, who was the straight guy in the Monty Pythons, played the main part, and Diana Quick and Simon Williams and David Jason, who played the Odd Job Man. And David Jason did it on television, on British TV, as a TV 1-hour film. And but Graham was trying to cast Keith Moon to play the Odd Job Man, you know. And I remember going to have lunch with Keith in Beecham Place in a wonderful small English restaurant, you know, and had this lunch with him, and had a lovely time with him because he was very famous, you know, and the whole band was very famous. And I was kind of quasi involved in the rock and roll world, you know, which I did get involved later on. Yeah. With my darling friend, you know, Roger Waters, you know, in the Pink Floyd. So I kind of knew that world, you know, and Keith really was desperate to play the role. And then, but I was very dubious, you know, because he was drinking a lot, and I don't know, basically we ended up smashing up the restaurant, you know, after lunch, you know. And then I told Graham, I don't think it's really going to work, you know, and I said, please do me a favor, you know, just read him for the role. And then I had this reading for him, and then it was just terrible, you know, and it was no good, you know. And then Graham said to me again, he said, look, give him another chance, you know. And I then went to see him in a hospital in St. John's Wood when he was recovering from alcoholism or something, or drug abuse or something. And he was lying in bed, and then he said, you know, I hope you don't mind, but I asked a friend of mine to come and help to read the other part with me. And it was Marianne Faithfull who turned up, you know, and Marianne read the woman role and Keith read the guy's role, you know. But then it just didn't, you know, it was hopeless, you know. I mean, not hopeless. I mean, he was brilliant, you know, but I mean, he didn't have that acting experience and all that. And it needed a very highly skilled comedian. And I would have been insane not to want to make the film with David Jason, because David Jason was absolutely phenomenal in it, you know. Yeah. And fantastic, you know. Anyhow, and so that, but it's amazing you even know about the film, because the film wasn't really successful, or what is successful, but I mean, it was shown and all that. But I loved kind of making the movie, you know, and it was very dark film in a way, but it was a very funny film.
That's why we need to see it in the new, because I love Monty Python, and I discovered the existence of this movie many years ago, and I always thought when we were going to see, I hope someday someone can finance the restoration, because it needs to be seen.
I think I will mention it to my friend Karen Statler. I don't know if you know her, but she's one of these incredible creative directors of Criterion, you know, the DVD label, who used to be a distribution company, and they distributed all the Bergman movies, but then they gone in the digital world, and they're the one who did Ruling Class of my movie, and Karen has been desperately working on to try to get The Craze, my other movie about the English gangsters, to put out on Criterion. But I'll mention it to her because, I mean, that's the only chance, because Graham was one of the Monty Pythons, and there may be a way of redoing it and you know, do commentary and find. I know Simon Williams is in England, you know, and David Jason is in England, and I think the producer of the film is in England. I'm trying to think who else may be alive from that whole period. Me.
Of course.
but I'm trying to. Oh yeah, my ex-wife, who was a wonderful English actress, who was also in Ruling Class, Caroline Seymour, but also plays a part in Odd Job. So one could gather up enough people to do interviews with and talk about the past. But I'll mention it to Karen, you know.
Well, I hope that your mention can have great results. But let's just talk, because I saw Ghost in the Noonday Sun recently, before watching the documentary.
Oh, you did? Yeah. What did you say?
Well, I didn't find it so terrible. I mean, it's noticeable that it's a case of a movie where you can see that something gone wrong. Even without watching the documentary, you can see that. But it has some very funny moments and very funny lines. Like, there's a moment, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's Peter Sellers who says that someone says, "You'll pay for this," and he answers, "I'm doing it for free." Like, all that kind of jokes, surreal jokes. I think the movie has its moments. It's not so bad as you think, because I know that you have the disaster of the project very much in you, and the documentary talks about that. But I think it's watchable. It's watchable.
I know, interesting, you know, because I mean, what would be great again if they would put it out, the two films, you know, Ghost of Noonday Sun and The Ghost of Peter Sellers together on a DVD, you know, and I'm hoping that maybe somebody, now that the movies come out, will think of doing that, you know, because I think it would be a great double bill on a DVD, you know, and maybe it will come to that, you know, who knows, you know.
Yeah, who knows. I think it would be a great idea, because watching one movie and the other, it's like a lesson in cinema of how to do and not to do things in cinema. But it's quite interesting, because in Ruling Class, you said in some interviews that Peter O'Toole was as difficult as Sellers, but it's quite the opposite case in the sense that I can't feel that. I can't feel that he was difficult. I just feel that the movie works really well.
Yeah, no, it did. I mean, it was a wonderful script, a wonderful play, and I mean, we just basically shot the play. But in a filmic way, and and I mean, it was a very high point of my whole filmic life, and will remain so. You know, there's about 5 or 6 movies out of the 25, 26 films, you know, which I carry in my heart, you know, forever, you know, not thinking about it every day, but I mean, it is, and it's a miracle that they happen, you know, because sometimes the director is lucky if they end up with one movie out of their whole career, which is the memorable one. And I feel I was fortunate enough to somehow do some of these movies, you know, which really made everything worthwhile.
Yeah. And I think I mean the ending of the ruling class is just, it's just terrific. It's really, really great. And I wanted to know how that that transition from the house of the parliament or something like that to the house of many corpses and many people. How was that made? And because it works really, really well.
Well, you see, the play was written by Peter Barnes, and Peter Barnes was a wonderful writer in London. Very poor, very struggling, you know, and we became a great friend very early on, and he was very instrumental in helping me with my very first film, which was Negatives, which I did with Glenda Jackson. And I wrote the script of that, and I don't consider myself a writer, but I took Peter Everett's book and I wrote it from that, you know. And Peter Barnes helped me. So I knew about ruling class very early on. And I really did the film because of Peter Barnes and because of Peter O'Toole, who was a great friend and at the time. And I dragged O'Toole to the theater to see it. And he bought the play for me to direct it before we came out of the theater. And that's why and how we did the film. And in the play, it was incredible, you know, because everything which is in the film is in the play. And there was this amazing transition, very theatrical transition in the play when you went from the living room set on the stage, and it in front of your eye, the lights went dark on the stage, and things started spinning, you know. And when the lights came up, that same set of the living room changed into the House of Lords set, you know. And it was the most incredible dramatic moment I'd ever seen in a theater. And I absolutely killed myself trying to figure out, how am I going to do this, you know, to do this transition into the House of Lords, you know. And in fact, I remember I had a terrible argument with Peter O'Toole in that set when he had to walk out. There was this set and there was the chair in the House of Lords of the I forgot the name, the black rod who sits there with this thing, you know, and behind him there was this chair like the Queen's chair, you know, and there was this corridor which was all in black on the film set, you know, and out of that, his wife, who he married during the film, which was my ex-wife, Karen Seymour, comes out singing the song, I Love You, Jack, because O'Toole's character in the film was Jesus Christ Mark II, JC Mark II, or Jack. And then he becomes Jack the Ripper halfway through the film, and the whole film changes, you know. So she comes out singing this song, and goes up to O'Toole, who's waiting for her in his lord's robe, and embraces her, and then he kills her, you know. So I had to do the shot when Peter is standing there, you know, and he categorically refused to do the shot. And he said, "You're crazy, you can't do this, because how can I be in the same place at two places at the same time? In the audience is mine, because at 1 second I'm in the House of Lords and he makes his big speech and all the skeletons are applauding him and she comes out singing the song and killing and all that. How can I be in two places at the same time?" And I said, "Peter, but that's the whole point of it, you know." And they said that was this incredible moment in the stage, in the theater, you know. And he completely refused to do it and walked off the set. And poor Jack Hawkins, you know, who was a wonderful English actor, who was part of his company, who lost his voice because of cancer, you know, he came up to me and I was sitting on the crane and when Peter walked off. And Jack says, he was swearing, and he says, I'm going to go get him, that bastard, you know, he's got to come back, you know. And anyhow, and I couldn't do the shot I wanted to do, but then I did it in editing, you know.
Yeah.
And thank God, O'Toole, after the first day of shooting, he's never seen a foot of rushes or dailies, you know. And when we screened the movie, for the first time, when I finished editing it, by then I had so much arguments with Peter, we weren't talking to each other, but he was sitting in front of me in the little cinema which belonged to Cubby Broccoli in Audley Street in London. And he turned around to me and I was sitting behind with my editor, who was this legendary English editor called Ray Lovejoy, who cut Kubrick's 2001, and he cut The Shining, and he cut 5 of my movies. And I'm sitting there with Ray, and O'Toole turned around, and I'm you, and I'm Peter. He turned around to me like this, and he turned around in his seat, and he could do this. He had a tear rolling down his one eye. And he said, "This is fucking incredible." And he walked out. And then I never seen him until we went to Cannes, when the movie became a big success. And the thing is that he had this very destructive thing in him, the same what Peter Sellers had, you know. And he tried to, although he was the producer of the movie, he bought it for me, he still, there was no limit of his destruction because he couldn't bear any competition. And he, you know, I don't know, it's this kind of craziness which come in, which then they don't remember about 2 days later. But you have to be an analyst to try to figure it out of what was all behind it, you know. But it wasn't, but still, he was a great friend, Peter O'Toole. And I mean, it was a gift for my life to do Ruling Class. There's no question about it, you know. And it lives on forever because it's when 1971 I did the movie. And it is constantly being screened, and it is the favorite movie of Scorsese and Spielberg, and the same with The Changeling, which I did with George C. Scott, and they have 35 prints of both of them. And I mean, Marty, he constantly keeps quoting it that one of the 5 or the 3 great ghost stories are X, Y, Z, and The Changeling, you know. And again, it lives on forever, and it is the magic of movies, you know, that is the same thing. I mean, Wild Strawberries, or The Seventh Seal of Bergman, or whichever, or I mean, I used to be absolutely insane about Louis Buñuel, you know, talking about Spain and talking about, you know, Portugal and your languages and all that. And I loved, absolutely loved Buñuel. And in a way, when I did negatives, I did very much in homage to him, although the story had nothing to do with his movies, but it was very, I had him very much in my mind, and it was my first movie ever.
Did you ever met Buñuel?
No, I didn't. I would have loved to, you know, but he had I met Fellini, and I mean, my great idols were, I mean, really, after 8½, when I saw 8½, which I was in Los Angeles on to Universal, you know, I remember standing in Wilshire Boulevard, leaning against a lamppost, you know, and I was saying it to myself, having seen 8½, I said, but there's nothing I can do after this movie. What shall I do? The only thing I can do is kill myself, you know. It was such an incredible film, and it was, you know, but it was Louis Buñuel, Fellini, David Lean, Truffaut, Coppola, you know.
Yeah. And how was Fellini? Did you find him a nice guy or not?
Oh, incredible. All he wanted to do is cook spaghetti for you.
And the spaghetti was good?
And oh yeah, incredible, you know. I mean, he was unbelievable. It's like his films. I mean, there's nothing like it. It's life just pouring out into your face. And I haven't seen 8½, and I was just thinking the other day, you know, I should look at it again. 8½, and also Amarcord. What a movie.
Those two movies are still incredible. After all these years, they are still incredible.
Incredible. I mean, you just have to listen to the music for 1 second. I mean, not even before they play the first note, you know what it is.
Yeah.
It was so fantastic, and I mean, those you know, are and I mean, Spielberg and Scorsese, I mean, phenomenal, you know, but those are the people and the movies one wants to live up to, not copy them, but I mean, just to be in the same room or to be in the same world, or it's magic. It's absolute magic, you know. There's nothing like it, you know.
Yeah.
And you don't need anything. I mean, you don't need those wonderful cameras. You don't need those wonderful smell of the 35mm film, or the smell of the stage. You know, when you open the big doors and the smell hits you, which has been there for 100 years at Universal Studios, you know, or when you go to MGM, which used to be MGM, which is now Sony, you know, you walk onto the stages when those silent movies were shot, or those incredible dance musicals, and just incredible history. And you know what I find really painful, that it's only like 100 years, the history of movies, or a little bit more, with you know, the wonderful scopes, you know, whatever.
Yeah, the tomatropia. I don't know if it's
I forgot the name of it now, you know, but it's, I mean, it's just, it's heaven. So what is terrible, that all the young kids and young directors, not all of them, some of them, have absolutely no knowledge of the past, you know. And if you ask kids under 30, and you say Peter Sellers, George C. Scott, you know, Glenda Jackson, Ellen Bates, you know, they just blank, you know, because they have no knowledge and history of it. And it's so easy to do it with the access of computers and everything. And you learn life, and you learn so much more that you would ever learn in any film school.
Yeah, but it's so sad because you're absolutely right. I mean, we have all this massive information on internet, all the ways possible to see movies from all decades, and I identify very much with what you said, because with many people of my generation, it's very difficult to talk about movies from even early 80s. It's just like impossible. Even more far than that, it's impossible.
I know. I remember the name of the first thing. It was called Laterna Magica, and it was you had to spin the paper, and you seen the horses kind of, and that was the beginning.
Yeah. And it was I think cinema started in 1895, so I was born 100 years later in 1995. And yeah, it's like an art with 125 years now, and many people seem to forget that all that history.
I know, and it all exists, everything. I mean, that wonderful thing of the rocket going into the eye of Mars or something, and that was who was that? It was.
It's the voyage to the moon from Georges Méliès.
Yeah. Incredible. It's boom. I mean, fabulous. It's. But what a gift it was that when I first thought about making films, I was like 10 years old. I mean, making films, of being fascinated with it. And it's a miracle that against all odds, escaping out of Hungary, not speaking English, ending up in England, and starting in the movie business 2 weeks later as an apprentice, of anything, cleaning up the camera maintenance department, whatever. But entering it, starting it, and then 7 years later, I end up on the contract in Hollywood to start to learn about direct television. It is insane.
Yeah.
How did it happen? Why did it happen? And the only reason I can give is that I was obsessed, and I'm obsessed with it. And I would never give up, and you can't give up. If you want to do something, you just have to do it, and you do it, and you forget. I promised myself that before I was 30, I was going to direct my first feature film. And I mean, I was a Hungarian refugee in London, and I'd forgotten about that promise, And when I did negatives in 1968, I suddenly remembered it, and I had to count on my fingers, saying, how many years was it, And I was 31, and I've forgotten about it, But and it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful, and it's been painful, and it's been up and down. Everybody's career goes up and down.
I'm just going to make some questions. First, on A Day in the Death of Joe Egg, which I loved it. It's a great film. And I think it really needs to be seen by more people, right? It's just a difficult subject matter, but it works so well.
Yes, I mean, I love doing it. It was about life. It was a true story. It happened. I met the little girl, Abigail, who was still alive then. And then later on, she passed away. And I love Peter Nichols, who wrote the play, which was a hugely successful play, which Albert Finney bought, and he put it on the stage. And I love making the movie. And Ellen Bates was the nicest, greatest actor I had ever worked with. I was not a nicer person on this planet. And Janet Sussman, who I just adored and adore, and we're still in touch constantly. And it was an incredible experience, you know, again, and I felt that my first three movies, which was Negatives, Joag, and Ruling Class, were just total perfection for me to make as a young director.
Yeah.
You know, trying to walk in the streets, you know, and I loved making Joag. I mean, it's so full of wonderful memories and magical time, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great film. And then you made the Ghost in the Noonday Sun after the Ruling Class, and we all know all the story behind it. But it's during the documentary you talk about your sense of guilty feeling because the many tragedies in your life. Do you think that sense of guilt is somehow reflected in your films?
Yes, of course, in the choice of subjects, you know. And well, it's because I mean, everybody's life, you know, and you always think, well, it's my life. It's not, you know. The minute you talk to the most people, you know, you meet in the street and you talk to them and you scratch the surface of their life, you find very tragical lives, because life is wonderful but very tragical, you know, because you're born, you live, and then you die, you know. And it's very important. But I mean, it made a very dark stamp on me, on, you know, on everybody's makeup. I mean, look at Mr. Steven God Spielberg, wonderful, incredible, you know. I mean, he'd become who he is because of his childhood, because of his mom and his dad, and watching television, growing up in Los Angeles and all that. And it created his character, absolutely. And had he been born in Hungary, being Jewish as I am, as he is, you know, he would have been a completely different person, you know. And it always fascinates me what makes these characters work and happen. And it's always in their past life, you know, of their, you know, of their background, you know, and that's what creates everybody in films, in whatever, in us, of who we are and what we are and what we are interested in and what fascinates you and what you dream about. And I mean, I would relive my life all over again with all its joys and pains and sorrows and everything, because it's you couldn't write it in a book, you know.
Yeah.
It's your life is a most incredible script, you know, and whether God writes it or whoever, but it is magic, you know, and it makes everybody different. There's billions of people in the world, you know.
Yeah.
You
You're
know,
right.
and the history and the past and Egypt and whatever, you know, Rome, Egypt, what we lived through, what we existed. Did we ever live before? Are we living again? What's going to happen when you die? I mean, it's all those questions which fascinated everybody, which is completely unanswered.
But what do you think happens when we died?
Well, I really like to believe that we do go to another place, because this here right now could not be about nothing. And it can't just be that we are atomic molecules, you know, and all that. And because if you look at the function of your body, and I want to know, I can't pronounce it, and then I can't pronounce it. and the anatomy of the body, you know, and the heart and how it functions, and it couldn't. I mean, who created it? What is it? What is it? You know, it can't just be. There is a reason behind it, and what it takes to make love, to be impregnated, to be born, to have the embryo to grow inside your body, how it becomes the particles of the mother and the father, and how you grow up, and it and how you live and you learn and you go through life, and you can't go through all that, going to school, trying to work, say the first word, you know, performing on the stage, or, you know, it can't be for nothing. There is, I absolutely believe there's something else, you know. And when Karl Reiner just died, who I loved, you know, and I mean, what he had given to the world, and Mel Brooks, and I mean, thank God Mel is still alive, you know, but it can't be for nothing. It has to be for something, and there is definitely something else. But it's the big secret. We don't know it, and we won't until you go there.
But
You know?
but that's I'm really finishing. But that opinion of yours really surprises me, because I found in some of your movies a great skepticism on people, and in Joe Egg, it's all the matter of why God allowed this to happen to that couple to have that child with that problem. But it's nice to have some hope and to hear someone having some hope despite of that.
I definitely do, you know. And the more that tragedy you go through your life, the more hope you have, actually, I think. And I'm not trying to make kind of pretentious analytical comments, you know, but it is just, it's my instinct. I mean, you know, that's all we have. And when I did the Ghost of Peter Sellers, I didn't write one word of it. I just did it, you know. And it's your instinct which tells you, do this, do that, do this, do that, you know, and we can't have this incredible machinery working whether one gets catatonically depressed one day and next day overjoyed, joyfully happy, you know. We can't evaporate into nothing, you know. And I did feel Peter and Spike's presence throughout the whole filming of the documentary. I knew they were here and they were laughing their head off, saying, you know, what is he doing now with us, you know? Anyhow, but it's a wonderful feeling, because it's a better feeling to know that there is something out there than that there is nothing there, you know?
Yeah.
I'd really wonder what these astronauts feel, and I worked with some of them, met some of them, talked to them, you know, of what do they feel when they're out in space and they look back to Earth and you see this tiny little nothing there, you know, but they know what is in there, you know, and when they look the other way into the universe, they don't know what is there. But I mean, they're doing a pretty good job of discovering it, you know.
Yeah.
You know, but it's all fascinating and wonderful, and everything has its little time, you know.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right. So I think we can finish here with this note of hope. Thank you so much. It was a pleasant conversation. And I hope that someday you can be here in Portugal to drink a great glass of wine, and of our Portuguese wine.
So
Okay.
I hope so. Thank you very much, and stay safe.